Americans often assume you need around $2.3 million to be considered wealthy. That's the figure Charles Schwab highlighted in 2025, and for most people, it feels just as out of reach as winning the lottery. But the amount you actually need to stop constantly worrying about money is much lower. In fact, you can estimate it this weekend with nothing more than a calculator and your latest account balances. There are 5 signs that you're already far more financially secure than you realize. 4 are based on straightforward numbers you can verify yourself. The 5th is different. It's the psychological reason people with solid finances still feel anxious about money, and it's where many people stay stuck for years. Let's begin with the numbers. The first sign is one of the biggest milestones in personal finance, and it's known as Coast Fire. The idea is surprisingly simple. There comes a point when your retirement investments have grown large enough that, even if you never invest another dollar, they can still grow into the amount you'll need by retirement age. At that point, compound growth begins doing the heavy lifting. You're no longer racing to build wealth. You're letting time finish the job. To estimate your target, many financial planners still use the well-known 4% rule. It suggests that a retirement portfolio worth roughly 25 times your annual spending has historically been enough to support about 30 years of withdrawals. The guideline originated from William Bengen's research in the 1990s, and even in his later work, he suggested that an even slightly higher withdrawal rate could often be sustainable. In other words, aiming for 25 times your yearly expenses is still considered a fairly conservative benchmark. Let's put that into perspective. Imagine Sarah. She's 35 years old, spends about $60,000 each year, and hopes to retire at 65. Using the 4% guideline, her long-term goal is about $1.5 million. Now comes the surprising part. Sarah already has approximately $200,000 invested. If she never contributes another dollar, and her investments earn an average real return of around 7% per year after inflation, that money could grow to roughly $1.5 million over the next 3 decades. Historically, that's close to what the U.S. stock market has delivered over very long periods. Although future returns will never be guaranteed, multiply your annual spending by 25. Then ask yourself one question. Can your current investments realistically grow into that number on their own by retirement? If the answer is yes, you may already be much closer to financial independence than you thought. The pressure to save every spare dollar begins to fade because your existing wealth is now doing more of the work. The second sign is when your investments begin earning more each year than you personally contribute. During the early years of building wealth, your paycheck drives almost everything. Your savings create progress, while investment gains remain relatively small. Then, almost without noticing, the balance shifts. Your portfolio starts generating more growth than you're adding from your own income. It's like hiring a second version of yourself that works around the clock without ever asking for a paycheck. A simple rule of thumb can help you recognize this crossover. When your annual savings become less than roughly 10% of your total investment portfolio, long-term market growth often begins contributing more than you do. It's not an exact formula, but it's a useful way to recognize the transition. Let's go back to Sarah. She has $200,000 invested and contributes about $18,000 each year. If the market delivers around 10% in a strong year, her portfolio grows by roughly $20,000, which is already more than she's adding herself. At that point, her financial progress becomes increasingly driven by her investments rather than her paycheck. Some years, the market will return much more. Other years, it may fall sharply. That's simply part of investing. But over long periods, once your portfolio consistently contributes more than your own annual savings, you've crossed an important threshold that many people never even realize exists. Your money has begun doing more of the heavy lifting than you are. The third sign has less to do with growing wealth and more to do with protecting it. Building investments is only half the equation. The other half is making sure one unexpected setback doesn't erase years of progress. That's where strong financial defenses come in. It may not be exciting, but this is often the difference between people who stay on track and those who are forced to start over. A solid emergency fund should generally cover 3 to 6 months of living expenses, held in a high-yield savings account or another place you can access quickly. At the same time, your monthly payments on non-mortgage debt, things like credit cards, auto loans, or student loans, should ideally stay below roughly 15% of your gross monthly income. Why keep cash sitting on the sidelines if your investments are earning more over time? Because timing matters. Imagine your car breaks down the same month you need a major home repair, while the stock market is down 20%. If you have cash reserves, you simply pay the bills and move forward. Without them, you may be forced to sell investments during a market decline, turning temporary losses into permanent ones simply because you needed cash at the wrong time. Financial planners often refer to this as sequence of returns risk. Having accessible cash is one of the simplest ways to avoid falling into that trap. Sarah spends about $5,000 per month, so a healthy emergency fund for her would fall somewhere between $15,000 and $30,000 in readily available cash. For the typical American household, annual spending is now around $78,500. According to recent government data, that means a healthy emergency fund would fall somewhere between roughly $20,000 and $40,000. If that sounds like a significant amount of cash, you're not alone. According to Bankrate's 2026 research, only about 3 out of every 10 Americans say they could cover an unexpected $1,000 expense directly from savings. So if you've quietly built enough cash to cover several months of living expenses, you're already in a stronger financial position than most people realize. That isn't just savings, it's protection. The fourth sign is when work becomes a choice rather than a necessity. Once you've reached the first 3 milestones, something even more valuable begins to emerge. Not simply more money, more freedom. Your investments become strong enough that your paycheck is no longer the only thing keeping your financial life together. Suddenly, your career decisions are driven less by fear and more by what actually matters to you. You negotiate differently because you know you don't have to accept every offer. You can decline projects that consume your evenings. You can reduce your hours, pursue a lower stress position, take several months between jobs, or finally walk away from a toxic work environment without feeling trapped. Morgan Housel captured this idea perfectly in The Psychology of Money. He wrote that the highest form of wealth is waking up each morning with the freedom to decide what you want to do with your day. That's the real return your investments provide, not luxury, control over your own time. There's an easy way to evaluate whether you've reached this stage. Ask yourself one honest question. If you left your job tomorrow, could you comfortably support yourself for the next 6 months without financial panic? If the answer is yes, you've likely crossed an important line, whether your job title has changed or not. Many people still rely completely on each paycheck because losing it would immediately create financial stress. Once that fear disappears, you're playing an entirely different financial game, even if you're still sitting at the same desk every morning. The fifth and final sign is the most surprising because it isn't found in your bank account. It's found in your mindset. You finally stop feeling financially insecure when the numbers no longer support that fear. This is where many financially successful people remain stuck. Credit Karma has found that nearly 1/3 of Americans underestimate their own financial stability, feeling as though they're falling behind even when their savings tell a very different story. Among younger generations, that disconnect is even stronger. Many Gen Z and millennial adults have accumulated above average savings, yet they continue to experience constant financial anxiety. Their accounts have changed, their mindset hasn't. Moving beyond that usually looks like 3 subtle shifts. You make a planned purchase without feeling guilty afterward because it fits your budget and your financial plan. You stop postponing important expenses, whether it's dental work, a medical appointment, or replacing worn-out brakes, simply because you're afraid of spending money you can clearly afford. And you stop comparing your financial life to carefully edited images of strangers online, recognizing that social media rarely shows debt, stress, or financial reality. None of those changes require hitting a specific net worth. Someone can have millions invested and still constantly worry about money. Someone else with far less can feel completely at peace. The purpose of the first 4 signs isn't simply to grow your wealth. It's to give your emotions permission to catch up with what the numbers have already proven. Real financial security arrives when your financial reality and your emotional response finally agree. Sometimes that realization comes immediately. Sometimes it takes a little longer. Think back to the $2.3 million figure we mentioned at the beginning. It's an interesting statistic, but it misses something important. Wealthy is a number determined by public opinion. Enough is a number you can calculate for yourself. That's exactly what these 5 signs are designed to help you discover. Not through guesswork, not through comparison, but through your own spending, your own savings, and your own financial life. The goal isn't chasing an arbitrary number that promises happiness. It's reaching the point where money no longer controls your decisions, and you regain control over them instead. If you've consistently invested for retirement, built a solid emergency fund, or simply stayed calm during the last major market downturn, you're probably much further ahead than social media would have you believe. So here's something worth thinking about this week. If you knew with complete confidence that you had already saved enough, what would you do differently next Monday? If this helped you see your financial progress more clearly, be sure to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who could use the reminder that financial peace isn't just about earning more, it's about recognizing when you've already built enough. You're watching Finance Haven, where better financial decisions create a stronger future.